Sarah.
Hello, I'm just going to share my screen, if that's all right. There we go. Right, can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Great. Okay, hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much to the organisers for actually asking me to do this and also be on the panel a bit later. My name's Sarah Cosgrove, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a science communicator based in the UK. If you know your UK geography, I'm down in Swindon in the southwest. So part of me feels a bit like an imposter, to be absolutely honest. It's because I think the perspective I'll be coming from today is somebody who is still figuring out their identity, who's quite new to their identity. And I know by speaking to other LGBTQ plus people, the feeling of an imposter is actually quite a common one, where I already had imposter syndrome of going into ace spaces and whether I belong there. And I sometimes feel like that under the umbrella. But by having people like OSTEM actually and the organizers of this conference to invite me to be here, it kind of makes me feel like maybe I do belong. So just want to say a little thank you. So today I will be talking about science communication, actually the different ways in which I've seen it being done and what it could be, but also the importance of LGBTQ plus people within this. I wanted to briefly start talking about my identity. So last summer, which is quite funny because a lot of people, I think last year over the pandemic, learnt new things about themselves and potentially even thinking about their identity. And I was one of those people. Last summer, I came to the realization that I'm somewhat on the asexual spectrum. I tend to like using the shorthand ACE because it tends to mean it's kind of a nice shorthand. It sounds quite cool. But I also realize that sometimes people don't necessarily know what that language means. So for those who are less familiar, I'll tell you that now. So the word asexual means somebody who experiences little to no sexual attraction and is a spectrum of identities as well. So there's the asexual spectrum. So you have gray ace or gray asexual, and you also have demisexual, which are the two most commonly known identities. Gray ace tends to mean somewhere within the gray area. So you examples of what they may experience is maybe sexual attraction rarely, or maybe with low intensity. And then those who are demisexual tend to experience sexual attraction only when there's a strong emotional bond with someone. But even if they do have a strong emotional bond with someone, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will experience sexual attraction. It's just the only condition which they do so. For gray aces, asexual people and demisexual out there, I hope I explained that correctly. But otherwise, please do let me know in the chat. But I don't know where I sit on the spectrum. I still have a lot of question marks around whether I do even experience sexual attraction, to be honest. And so it's something that I'm really fortunate to be engaging with people who are ACE and with the ACE community, reading around a lot. What does it mean? What are different experiences? And I think one of the things I've really benefited from this community is the fact there is such a diverse range of different experiences. And so I don't feel like I have to tick the boxes, although I did at the start, to be honest. And that's just been quite nice. And the other reason why I've kind of been feeling like a bit of an imposter is that as well as being ace, I am heteroromantic. So that means I experience romantic attraction to men. So sometimes some of the comments I've seen online is, well, you're just straight. And that doesn't necessarily make me feel welcome, but aces are actually being really welcoming of everyone. And because asexuality cuts across all, like pretty much any identity you think of, or any, and that's not necessarily just queer identities, it means you really see diverse range of different experiences and meeting lots of different people. So that's just a bit about me. And now I'm starting to think about what does this mean to be for me as a science communicator. So what I should say is what I'm about to share with you are new thoughts. I still feel like I'm doing a lot of thinking around this. And there are people who's, academics have thought about this for a while. There are practitioners who thought about this for a while. And I come from the perspective of someone who's practicing science communication for several years. And then now starting to think about, okay, so it turns out I'm ace, I'm not straight. How does that affect me as a science communicator? Whereas there's some other people who may have come in the other way around, where they were very aware of their queer identity for a long time and then became a science communicator. So I feel like, I don't know if our experiences will be similar or different. I expect that they might be different. And so this is why I feel like this is me at the start of the process. It's kind of like the starting of a working out of a math problem, and you haven't quite solved it yet. But I even think that I don't think I'll ever really quite solve it either. So I hope that I'm able to share with you in a comprehensible way, because it feels like still a bit of a tangled sort of wire mess in my head that I'm still trying to sort through. And I'd just be interested to know what you think as well. So let's start off with what science communication is. If you got the whole, like science communicators all over the world into one room, we would not be able to actually say specifically what science communication is. It really differs depending on what science communication you do, why you do it, the different formats. But as my definition, which I don't think is too far from others and may even be similar to others, is improving accessibility to science and for different audiences. And what do we mean by improving, and what do we mean by access? So I guess with accessibility, that can be things like what are the different formats we could have science communication in? How can we involve our audiences? Accessibility in terms of what spaces we do science communication. If we think about actually the ways in we communicate information, science communication can take all those different formats. Often science communication can be seen as the media, it could be seen as outreach to schools, it could be things like science festivals, but it's so much more than that. And this is why I quite like my definition, because it can be taken in the broader sense of what do we mean about improving access to science. So let's then think about why it's important that we have LGBTQ+ people as part of this. And the first is to challenge norms. And I feel like hearing sort of things like when we see queer people speak in lots of different contexts, this is one of the things I really like seeing, whether it's thinking about history, for example. It could also be a way in which we can challenge it, not just within science, but also the way we communicate science. So a few years ago, there was this headline that said, Mars missions may be all female to avoid astronauts having sex during the 1.5-year journey. And this was based off Helen Sharman, who was the first British astronaut to go to space. She was interviewed, and she just mentioned this study that was never really published by NASA. And this was one of the things that was mentioned in order to essentially make sure that astronauts don't get pregnant on the way to Mars. And a load of people everywhere just went, do you know that women can have sex with women? Like, that is a thing. And so it's just the fact that this was completely missed from the context of when this article headline was written. Me as an ACE person just went, well, if NASA's really that bothered about people having sex, then surely they should just send a team who don't have sex. Like, surely that should have been actually the more obvious solution. And that could include ACE people, but it could include anyone who doesn't want to have sex. And bearing in mind that there are some ACE people who do have sex for different reasons. Another way I've seen this sort of the queer lens is the way we maybe even to explain identities, kind of more of like an analogy. This is, I've got a photo here of Amru Al-Kadhi, otherwise known as Glamru. They're a drag performer based in the UK. And in this Channel 4 News interview, they talked about being non-binary and talking about quantum physics in quite a bit of detail. And there's this quote from this, which I loved, which was, if subatomic particles defy constructs all the time, why should we believe in fixed constructs of gender or any kind of reality? And I thought that was brilliant. As for someone who's done science comedy, this really inspires me, because I'm trying to find a way of bringing in science to comedy and asexuality. And this has inspired me in the way of how I can do it, because I've actually been struggling to find ways to do that and talk about asexuality as someone who's a science communicator. So this is something I absolutely love seeing, and that perspective and bringing in that queer perspective. But another thing to also think about is, well, there's the messages and the communications, but what about the sort of the impact on policy? Now, this paper, which I will link in the chat, has just come out this month. It is excellent, and it kind of highlights how we have a lack of academic research, so science communication research into queer perspectives in science communication, and bringing queer theory into that as well. But one of the things that, so I've got the paper here, one of the things that they mention in this paper is actually what is the impact of certain science policies. So they say here, queer theory would question, for example, the consequences of contact tracing apps developed to assist with pandemic management when the same technology can be used to police and punish queer people, as has been the case in South Korea during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is one example of probably multiple, but I thought that was a really good point raised there. So you could also have challenging the way we apply science as well as the way we communicate it and even do science. Secondly, empowering LGBTQ+ people. The way I want to kind of start to think about this is the deficit model. So I run science communication training. I do it as part of my freelance aspect of my life. And one of the things I ask the people I train is, why do we do science communication? And one of the answers I tend to get quite a lot is, we need to tell the public about science. We need to educate the public. And the problem with this is that you can go down the lines of the deficit model. This is when you have expert, non-expert. So, hello, I am scientist, I am expert. I'm going to talk to you, non-expert, and give you science. And it has a couple of assumptions with this. It's the assumption that the quote unquote non-expert actually wants to listen to what you've got to say. And this is where I say in training, when doing science communication, you need to think about why audiences care about what you've got to say. And also it's assuming that the non-expert, well, this non-expert is not an expert in something that they don't have experiences they can talk about, that actually science could look like lots of different things in their lives as well. What we really should be having is dialogue, but also I would argue, what if the power dynamics was actually kind of maybe a bit the other way around, although dialogue is still important. And this is where I was thinking about the role of activism. So activists will know how to engage people. They are also within their own communities. And I've just been sort of observing ACE activism. And I guess one point I want to make from this is that, well, let's say we want to include science as part of that. Science communication doesn't have to be done by those who are science communicators, whether they're formally trained or get experience, but working in the sector, or let's say science communicators who could be scientists who do it on the side of their research, or they include it as part of their role. Science communication can be done by lots of different people, because science communication can look like a lot of different things and have a lot of different purposes. So this is where I feel like activists will also know the limitations of talking about science as well, because you also have to talk about real lived experience. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So there is a book by Anthony Bogaert called Understanding Asexuality. This came out in 2012. Another way in which people see science communication is sort of published books. And he talks about his research, but I've read bits of it so far because I've only just got it. And one of the things I noticed in it is I could just tell he wasn't from the community. There was something about it. And although his research, to what I can tell, has been used to talk about how we shouldn't pathologize asexuality, it's a very important thing, there are also limitations to it, but also science can't explain everything about identity. And I don't think that science can always be the thing we use all the time to validate identity, at least from an ACE perspective. I can't talk on behalf of other identities. For me to identify as ACE, I didn't feel like I had to see science literature to say that this sexuality exists and what about it. It was community that let me find the language and allowed me to talk to others about our experiences, and it supported me. And this is where I feel like ACE activists therefore will know. They also may be leading on the research, they may be involved with the research as well. And so I feel like there needs to be a bridge between science communication and communities like this. We can't just be, I just don't feel like we can do it without the community, but also pay attention to what activists do in the way they communicate their messages. Third is to bring science to different spaces. So the ways I've seen this being done more recently is through drag, cabaret, and comedy. So the image I have on the right is a logo for Science as a Drag. They're based up in Scotland. So that's Carla Suciu, Brynley Pelstone, and Sam Langford, all based in Glasgow. Their next show is next month, if you want to go along. The image on the left is from a different Science as a Drag that was in Canada. And I love, I really enjoyed actually going to the one based up in Glasgow, although it was all online, because I saw drag performers include science as part of what they did. And if anybody has just watched the most recent RuPaul's Drag Race UK episode, you can see a little bit of that. I won't spoil it just in case you haven't watched the episode yet, or if you do. And And also I saw scientists also taking part in queer culture. So I just love this bridge between the two. So there's the kind of evening events aimed at adults, but I also, that's not what I was meant to do. I also want to talk about it in terms of engaging young people, because this is where a lot of my experience has been. My experience has been working with schools and young people. And something I want to actually kind of mention with this is actually what could be the role of science and science communication, and what purpose can it have? There's a project I started in collaboration Pride in STEM with my local LGBT youth group. It's called STEM for Queer Youth. We had got some funding from the Biochemical Society, but unfortunately this project has been put on pause because of COVID, essentially. Basically, I went in, it was July 2019, I went in with a marble run activities, which is what the photos I've got on screen are a product of. And what you need to do is you need to build the longest marble run possible. And that's it, that's all you get. And here are a bunch of craft materials. And as you can see, the young people did it in different ways. I use this as a way of testing, would they like this kind of thing? Would they be interested in some STEM engagement? And they seemed to enjoy it. So we went for the funding, we recruited scientists, and the project was part of it was to train scientists on and helping them practice science communication, help them develop activities. So hopefully to benefit them. For the young people, you'd think, well, is this about science careers? And is this for them to learn about science? And I'd say not necessarily. That's more of a secondary objective, but something that takes more of a back seat. The thing I kind of noticed from speaking to the group was that, well, they enjoy activities like this. And that's one of the reasons why we came to the youth group. But also, just think about what is that youth group for? It's there to give them a sense of community, to meet others like them, to get that support from the youth leaders, maybe support they weren't getting elsewhere. So I needed to think about those needs first. The youth leaders were wonderful, but I noticed that in terms of identities, it was not representative of the young people that were there. So one of the things I wanted to do when recruiting the scientists was consider that in who I recruited, and show also a diverse range of STEM work that they may be doing, and also different life experiences as well. So that was the kind of thing I had first. So sometimes with science communication, science doesn't have to come first. And that may sound like a strange thing because one of the words in science communication is science, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that at all. And this is something I picked up from a previous role when I worked in a youth charity. And I just wanted to mention this project here. So I'm not the only one who's done work with queer young people, but this project also did this in the US. So I think they're working with high schools to actually support them with their learning. So if you want to look them up, they're called Queer Science. Finally, I'd see us also having the opportunity to tell stories that we just don't see. We're in LGBT History Month in the UK at the moment, so it's a really good example of that. In terms of how I've seen it being done, I've seen it being done in lots of different ways. So whether that's a profile on 500 queer scientists, I also saw last year the STEM Village, who are based up in Scotland. They did a conference where they got different scientists to speak, very much like this. There's also queering museums, which I think is really cool. So you've got Dan Vaux, Sasha Coward, Ellie Armstrong, who I know have been involved in this. And they have looked at museum collections and done museum tours where they tell different stories, but also can question and bring in their own perspectives. And the bottom right, I have a logo for QWERTY. It is one of quite a few, I think, STEM Quit podcasts. So this is done by Matt Young, who is going to be on the panel later. And this podcast gave me the opportunity to hear for the first time Jasmine Scarlett, who spoke about what it meant for her to be asexual. Like, that was the first time I really saw somebody or heard somebody talk at length about what it meant to be asexual, and somebody who worked in STEM. And she's someone she was one of the first people I came out to. I just went, I need to talk to someone about this. Jazz, can I talk to you, please? And it's because of just knowing, like, she was there, she was visible. And a podcast like QWERTY meant that I was able to find, like, I met her and spoke to her after that, but also I had somebody to go to for help. So thank you, Jazz, if you're watching this or watching the recording. And then finally, Wikipedia. I've seen Wikipedia's in terms of the diversity of scientists that feature on there has changed a lot over the years. A lot of work by Jess Wade, if you've come across her. And I know that she's also going to be doing a Wikathon, I think, as part of LGBT History Month. But this is a way in which we can add our stories and tell our stories as well. I was thinking about the idea of, well, do we give the microphone as a microphone given to us, or do we take the microphone? And I haven't really got quite the answer to that, but essentially we're the ones telling the stories. So, oh, and finally, I forgot I had this in here. If anybody's been watching Drag Race UK, on I think it was the first runway, one of the categories was gay icons. And so drag queen Tia Coffee came out in a suit with ones and zeros, so it's binary for love and it's all in rainbow colors. And she talked about Alan Turing. And Alan Turing is arguably one of the most famous LGBTQ plus people in STEM, especially in Britain. It's on the £50 note. I mean, there's a film about him, there's Bletchley Park that talks about him. And yet there were so many people I've never heard of him. And after this episode aired, people were talking about Alan Turing. And I was really thinking about, is this science communication happening right here? But I remember seeing this and I just loved it, because just look at that impact. People were talking about Alan Turing. And it really got me thinking about the different ways in which science communication can take place. But I also just wanted an excuse to use this GIF because I love Tia and I absolutely love this GIF. So that's 4 different perspectives on why I feel it matters. But I think there's another way of also summarizing this into a much shorter way rather than what I've been doing over the last 20 minutes. And it brings me back to a memory I have of doing a show in late 2019. It's a kind of diversity in STEM show. I did it in front of young people. It was part of a Girls in STEM Day somewhere. And so I include LGBTQ plus scientists as part of this because that's what I did. And a young person came up to me at the end. I remember they had short hair, they had these rainbow studs, they were wearing enamel pins, and they asked me about sort of visibility of LGBTQ plus people in STEM and the history and why we don't hear about them. And we had a short conversation, but it was probably one of the best interactions I've ever had with young people in my career so far. And I think just simply what happened by me talking about LGBTQ plus scientists is that they may have felt seen. And maybe the why it doesn't matter is that we just get to be seen. Maybe it's just as simple as that. So that's me done. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be curious to see if there's any questions, and I'm just going to try and open the chat box as well. But yeah, that's me.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, we've got quite a few questions lined up for you. So to start off, do you think inclusive science communication is more important than some fields than others? The example given is a biologist might need to better understand trans issues than a physicist.
Oh gosh, that's such a good question.
Okay, going right in there with that.
Oh gosh, that's a really good question, because I also know there's another speaker later on who's going to talk about science communication as well, and I'm really looking forward to it actually. So I would be interested to know their perspectives. I think EDI in SciComm is important in every kind of SciComm, I think. But at the same time, I do understand what you mean in terms of what are the most pressing issues as well. So from that perspective, I can understand. So yeah, I mean, earlier, wasn't there somebody who's talking about the idea of inclusive curriculums as well? So I still feel like, as I mentioned, the idea of being seen is important. Yeah, sorry, that's not a very good answer. I don't really know I think yes and no.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I don't think these things are necessarily black and white answers.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they were, but sadly.
Yeah, totally. They were as simple as that.
So next we have, do you have any advice for people wanting to do LGBT activism while still questioning their identities? I just note that you went straight in there as soon as coming out, which I admire, because it definitely took me a few years to come to terms with my identities before I started doing anything about it.
Yeah, I kind of did, didn't I? I think that, so I remember when I just, one of the reasons why I wanted to come out was because I really wanted to talk to people about it. You spend so much time in your head just kind of going, but am I not? And what does this mean? And is this sexual attraction? Like the one thing I still Google every few months or every so often is, what is sexual attraction? Because I'm like, I still don't really know, at least in terms of me phrasing it myself. But in terms of questioning, what I will say is that I'm an admin on an ACES and STEM Discord. If you want to join, I'm going to put my email in the chat, or you can come and talk to me, or you can DM me on Twitter. But it's welcome for questioning people. And I think that's really important for queer spaces, is to be open to questioning people, because that's the thing I needed. I needed to talk to people and say, what's going on with me? Help. What was the first part of the question? I've just forgotten it. Oh, sorry, you muted.
Sorry, I was saying I've got to find it now. It's gone into the answered box.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Was it about
activism? It was activism while you were still questioning your identity.
Yeah. Was that the sorry, can you say that again?
Right, so the full question was I've lost it again.
Sorry.
It was, do you have any advice for people wanting to do LGBT activism while still questioning their identity?
Oh, still questioning their identity. So one of the things I didn't mention is that with the STEM for Queer Youth project, part of me is just wondering, did I know? Like, why was I so interested in doing a project like that? But it also got me thinking about, what if you do want to practice science communication? And also I think this extends to activism. When you may not want to be out yet, or if you're still questioning, or you don't ever want to come out. And I think what's actually one thing that's really important within science communication is that you don't want to be the only one in the room anyway. You feel a lot of pressure on you to feel like you have to speak on all identities. I can't do that, but also I can't talk about all ACE experiences. That's what other voices are there for. So I think kind of with those kind of things in mind, I think not doing it alone, I think is really important. And maybe you can apply the same thing to activism as well. It's not something I haven't really been involved with activism, but I think I would like to, and I've been trying to find out ways in which I could. But I think it's just, for me, there are things you can do, let's say behind the scenes, you can still be supportive, but also, as I said, like, I think it's important for the community to be welcoming of questioning people. And I feel within the ACE community, it's something I've experienced so far, although I couldn't say it necessarily in all ACE spaces. I hope that answered the question, but I think, yeah, don't do it alone, I think.
I think that's a good just general for all activism, especially for minorities in STEM. We all need to kind of work together in this. So next is, do you find there's a bit of a disconnect between general LGBT STEM events and your experience as an general LGBT STEM events and your experience as an ACE person? If so, what can be done to make these events more inclusive of all identities and experiences?
I'm not sure about events particularly, but something I have observed by speaking to other ACE, and also I should add aromantic people. One of the issues I see with aromantic people is they're often put under the umbrella of asexuality, which is incorrect. Even though you have people who may be asexual and aromantic, they are two different identities in two different communities. And I find that a lot of LGBT organizations either don't do enough for us, or they don't even recognize things like that. Or if they do enough for ACE people, they do not do enough for aromantic people. So I can't really talk from an event perspective, to be honest, but I also do recognize, I just did see a comment in the chat about being out as ACE. There was a survey I found from 2018, which said that, or suggested that in terms of sexuality, the least likely to be out in the workplace is people on the ACE spec, really. And that doesn't surprise me, because a common thing I see is that people will tell you on a you would tell people on a need to know basis. And also, something I was quite also aware of is that what will people think about like me? What assumptions are they going to make about me? Why do they feel like I'm telling them something unnecessarily, something that's too personal? And that's something I've been thinking about. Also, one of the things that made me worry about coming out is what will people think about mine and my husband's relationship? Like, will they make comments? Will they make assumptions? So yeah, so I think that the other thing, so with events, is that if you don't see ace speakers, it's just, well, it's hard to come out as ace. For me, because I think of being heteromantic, I guess but also I think being a bit older and knowing I have support. Actually, I got to say, like from science communicators, I've had so much support, particularly from science communicators and LGBTQ plus science communicators. They were some of the first people I came up to, and they've been wonderful. And even if they haven't been ace, they've been just wonderful and supportive. So yeah, I realize I've just said a load of stuff to answer that question.
But no, that's good. It's good that science communicators are definitely supportive. We've definitely heard today that some maybe industries and stuff aren't as supportive. So it's good that science communicators are.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice about how to best understand this range of ace identities? They say, I asked from the perspective of somebody who's confused as whether they might be ace but would otherwise identify as cis and straight and don't want to impose themselves incorrectly.
Yeah. And I know that feeling. Oh gosh, I know that feeling. I think one of the things that really helped me in terms of like, what if I'm not, and what if I'm taking up space from someone, is, well, the language is for you. You know, if it helps you, then I think that's enough. I think that's one of the things I've seen in the ACE Discord is somebody asking like, well, what if I'm not, like, what if I'm wrong? And it's like, well, if you feel like it is, like, that's good enough for us. Like, that's a thing with self-identification. Yeah, in terms of finding out more, I'll recommend a good book. Do I have it nearby me? It's Ace by Angela Chen. And what I really love about the book is it talks about a broad range of identities, but it's also quite intersectional as well. And what I loved about reading Angela's story is that her experiences are quite similar to mine. And to see that represented was like really cool for me. I think also I've been on places like Reddit, and actually I've like an Ace Reddit, and just seeing like asking people questions has been good, and you can keep that anonymity. But also if you feel comfortable talking to me, like my door's open, but I appreciate you don't know me. And as I mentioned, the Ace STEM Discord is there where you can be there anonymously as well if you do want to ask questions. It is quite, we do welcome people asking questions to learn about people's experiences and to say, I don't really know, I'm questioning. You'd be very welcome.
So this one is, as a science communicator, how do you communicate with researchers who study and pathologize our identities to make them stop being terrible? I'm not sure if you have experience with this, but I guess any advice
I don't
you
have
can give.
experience with this. But I think the thing that sometimes we miss when it comes to science is really thinking about what is the social impact on people. And this is why I think science communication can be good. However, we also need to be really responsible about the way of doing science communication. So something I did think about a few months ago was, oh, well, I'd really like to talk about asexuality in a science context. But I realized, I kind of took a step back and realized, actually, I need to be a lot more responsible of that and actually spending time with the community. So I don't necessarily have any advice in terms of engaging scientists. I think it's kind of going back to the why. One of the things I also talk about in training is actually consider your audience. Like, why are you communicating this? Like, what is your purpose? But also, have you thought about how that may affect your audience? Your audience really, at the end of the day, should come first. As much as you've got all your science and the stuff you've got to do, your audience is always first. And I think that might be the way of communicating it. And I think also that the science communication, like, should be done, I think, in terms of who should be the voice, and the lead voice should be people from the community. And I think that's something, yeah, because they'll kind of get that nuance, but also the fact that we see them, we get that visibility rather than, I mean, if we look at the history of research into queer people, it's been very much about, it's not been done by queer people, and it's been very much about why are they different and then how do we fix them? It's not come from a good place. So I think, yeah, that's another rambly answer, sorry.
All right. And this next one is, do you have any, how would you suggest we get involved with queer SciComm as like beginners?
Right, so beginners. One of the things I'm going to mention is so the Global Science Show is run by my friend Sam Langford. He did one for LGBT STEM Day in November, and that was a really good way of people practicing without necessarily being in front of people. They could do threads, they do images, they can do videos, whatever they want, essentially, that they can share on Twitter. So yeah, I feel like spaces like that can be a really nice way of practicing. And also because of the theme of the month, you could talk about your work specifically, or you can actually be more specifically around LGBTQ plus stuff. Also knowing people who run things like Science is a Drag, if you are interested in doing that, just contact them. Honestly, the worst they'll say is no, if that's something you want to do. I'm just trying to think of other ways. There was also a panel at the STEM Village, and this was a recorded video. So, there was a panel about, there was a drag panel in that. I haven't watched it myself, but I've been told it's a really good panel as well. I'm just trying to think of other ways. That's kind of missed me. But as all the other things I mentioned, like 500 queer scientists, to the Wikipedia pages, there are lots of different ways in which you can do science communication as well. But I think just practicing and starting in different places can be quite good. And even events like this is a really good way of doing science communication as well, because at least you feel like you're with the community, within the context, a certain context as well. And you get to practice talk about your work if that's what you want to do. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Definitely. And then with so much science funded by public money, how do you think we can encourage academics to better engage with science communication? And do you think this would have other benefits, such as improving collaborations?
So I know that from a research council's perspective, they've put public engagement as a higher priority, and that actually you need to include public engagement as part of when you apply for funding, really. So public engagement and science communication are not the same thing, but they do overlap a little bit. But public engagement with research, it's kind of about a two-way communication where you can inform the public about your research, but they can also inform your research as well, if you've not come across it. So I'd say incentives like that, and some bids can actually include the hiring of science communicators as well. So that's the other thing I think is really important, is that science so thinking about freelancers, for example, they should be paid for their time and for their expertise. And that is something that could be built into funding. I also know universities, I know Birmingham Uni, I think, had pots of money for public engagement as well. And then also about how can things like public engagement, science communication benefit you as, let's say, a researcher too. So for example, writing abstracts for a paper, or even raising the awareness of your research, the awareness of your university. So it's kind of about selling what are the benefits that you're bringing back to, let's say, your university, if that's where you're based, but also thinking about, as like the little tick box, it's like, well, I have to include public engagement as part of a grant proposal. So they kind of have to do it, if that makes sense. And also, I know universities may have, let's say, public engagement officers where they can say, this is something that we, and also thinking about things like REF as well, where they need to submit case studies for REF. So it's about finding those little incentives, really.
Thank you. So as you might have seen in the chat, if you're happy to, Sarah, we're just going to carry on with a few more questions while we organise the talk. So having some short schedule, like some
That's
very
absolutely
quick
fine.
Schedule changes. The next question is, how do you deal with the current volatile atmosphere with many school communities regarding teaching about LGBTQ identities? I think this is especially pressing, obviously, for us in like Birmingham with the Birmingham LGBT school protests.
Yeah, it's hard. So one of the things I realized I didn't actually say what I do as a job. So I work on a gender balance project at the Institute of Physics, where we look at girls' uptake of physics. And one of the things I have talked about in schools is things like homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, because gender comes into this, like, in terms of where those where discrimination comes from. A lot of it comes from gender stereotypes, right? So I kind of, on the more positive side, I've seen good things in schools, but from like watching Emily's talk earlier about what is the impact of things like Section 28, the impact is we've got this gap. So even if now from a legal standpoint, we can talk about these things, teachers may not necessarily know how to. But I have seen things get better. I also know that Stonewall have, they've got like accreditation systems, like a bronze, silver, gold status for different schools, where if they do certain things, they can get the status. It's not perfect, but I think it means that it's now more on a school's agenda. I think it really depends on which school you go to, because some primary schools are really, really good and doing diversity there. I've seen secondary schools who are really good as well. I think one of the things that sometimes we might miss is the intersectional element. So I remember one school I was working with had a board for LGBT History Month, but it was very white, and they realized that. And bearing in mind that the community that they work with is a very diverse community as well. So I guess I don't necessarily really know the answer to this question, but what I would say is that there is some good things going on, and there are some good things going on in schools. It's just not widespread, and schools aren't necessarily supported. That's a thing. They don't necessarily have that support needed. They don't have the funding needed to do that. They don't have the and even thinking about the staff having that kind of expertise. So I think there are teachers who I've met who want to help, but they're just a bit like, well, I don't really know how. So I think it's about solving that, really. How do we provide schools with that kind of support? If anybody is interested in reading more about this, there is a report by Stonewall published around 2017, 2018, which have, one of the things I've done when talking to teachers is saying, here's this report, here is why it's really important that you address this in your school, because this is stuff that teachers may not be able to see. And that the fact that, you know, these are kids in your classroom, even if you don't know it. I see there's one other question in the Q&A.
There was another question as well that I don't know where it has gone.
Where did that question go?
I think it was the, sorry, I think I found it. It was for the queer people that have previously felt excluded from the community, do you have any tips for making their queer identity part of their STEM communication, EDI activism?
So sorry, so to make sure I understand that, so to have how to bring an identity into your into science communication, is it? Sorry, yes, is that right?
When you have felt excluded in the past, as
when I felt excluded. I've been really lucky. I've very lucky in that I've had more positive experiences than negative ones. And also, I also feel like it may be a bit too early for me to answer this question as well. I think the things that have made me feel very conscious is about, so one of the things I've been kind of doing in more recent months is tweet about ace things. And I've been worried about becoming that person. And like, oh, that person that just talks about ace things all the time, could you just stop? And in reality, people can just ignore what I say and just carry on and do what they like. So I think it's about being made to feel comfortable to be yourself and talk about these things if you want to, but also the fact there is no expectation for you to as well. Something I see within EDI and STEM is that oh, well, you are this identity and this is all there is of you, then that's all you want to talk about. And it's like, no, that not necessarily. So yeah, there's that. And I also, as I mentioned at the start, just being asked to do things like this, just being actively welcomed. And I think that's particularly something I've sort of observed as an ACE person and the ACE community is actively being welcomed into these spaces, I think. And I've so far have been.
Good. And yeah, I think there is just this final question about, is there a specific medium, the meaning for Scandian?
Notice my name, it's just my initials. That's it. This was cross-stitched though. I do not recommend cross-stitching anything like this because of the size and the fact it was black thread. It was very boring to do. But yeah, and it's just so that I have a nice zoom background, honestly. And then this is also a little bit of cross-stitch there too. So yeah. Yeah, thank you all so much for your questions. They're really good questions. Part of me feels like I don't feel like I have the full answers to them yet, to be honest, because of just, as I mentioned, my thought process is so new. So if anybody does want to talk about this, please come. I'll probably go in the networking space during the break. Anybody wants to talk to me about ACE things. I'm also, as I mentioned, going to put my email in the chat if you ever want to talk about anything I've talked about today. ACE things, SciComm things. I realized I didn't really talk about the sort of SciComm career stuff. If you want to talk about that, you'd be most welcome to get in touch with me. So, and thank you also for, I'm going to go through the chat shortly. Thank you all for what you've all said. It's really nice and makes me feel nice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for talking. Then we'll move on to our next speaker.